Okay. Okay, I'm not sure if everyone can hear me, but we'll just wait a few more minutes before we begin.
Okay, you know what you're doing?
A second, start video.
Okay. I see Rabbi Junik, we can see you. Oh,
1 second. Could you see me?
no. Yeah, we can
Okay,
see you
yeah.
now. Yeah, yeah. Okay, we'll wait 1 minute and then we'll begin. Wait till 8:30. Okay. 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 I would like to welcome everyone to this truly incredible series of shiurim as a Hachono for Gimel Tammuz. It's truly an incredible, incredible thing to be able to connect with so many people all over the world. And it reminds me of the last Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which says, Kol ma shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'olamoi lo yivra ela lichvodoi, that everything that the Eibusha created in this world was created in order to reveal his glory. And there's no doubt about it that Zoom was certainly created to be able to Marbitz Torah and to be able to connect so many people all over the world. The speaker tonight, I haven't spoken to him for many, 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 many years. But the speaker tonight is Rabbi Junik, is someone that was a shliach in South Africa when I was a child, 9, 10 years old, 1986, 1987, I believe. And we have very fond memories of Rabbi Junik. I just want to recall one very interesting story, which I don't know if I ever told him, or we must have spoken about it at one stage. But I was a kid of 9, 10 years old, and we used to hang around during our lunch break in a dormitory where the Bachrim were. And in those days, we're talking about over 30 years ago, there was a payphone. And the payphone rang. So there was no one around to pick it up. So we picked it up. There was a few of us. We picked up the phone, and on the other line, there was someone that said, "Can I please speak to Menachem, Junik?" Who's speaking? Musia. We had no idea who we were talking to. We had no idea what it was about, but we went and we called Rabbi Junik. For all of you that don't realize who that is, Rabbi Junik had an incredible personal relationship with the Rebbetzin. And I believe, if I remember correctly, you told me that she used to call regularly to ask how you were doing, Pashat Begashmias. If your linen was clean, if you had what to eat, if you were taken care of, etc., etc. So I feel it's quite fitting that the topic is how to get the most out of your personal relationship. You certainly knew how to have an incredible relationship with the Rebbetzin. Before I hand you over to Rabbi Junik, I would like to say thank you to Avrami Joseph, Moshe Amzelak, Moti Rabin from Young Yeshiva for putting together this extraordinary series of shiurim as Hachono for Gimel Tammuz. There is no doubt that this causes an extreme nachas ruach to the Rebbe, and through his kashrus to the Rebbe, where we all be takeh zoiche to hear Torah Chadosh Amiti Teitze with the Gula Amitis V'Ashlema, without further ado, Rabbi Junik.
Thank you very much. Good morning from London, which is good evening out there in Australia. And I know there's a whole people talking about the minyanim davening on Zoom. You can't hear Kaddish, Baruch Hu, Kedusha, but I'll make a bracha. We'll start off with Al-Chaim, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Hachono v'vorei.
Amen.
Chaim.
Amen.
Thank you, Aaron, for the introduction. And even though South Africa and Australia aren't that close as neighbors, but nevertheless, I had a zchus to be a Bachar Shlich in South Africa for 2 years. And those 2 years actually changed my life. And I remember your parents, Zayin Gesund, the Lipskers, Shimon Leah Joseph lived there, and Mati Rabin, and many others, and people that are on here. Baruch had connections for many, many years. And as the Rebbe spoke, all those years ago in Tafshin Lamed Ches in 1978, after the Rebbe had the heart attack on Simchas Torah, on Shmini Atzeres, and the Simchas Torah night, when the Rebbe spoke from his room, the Rebbe said that, that the fact that we're able to talk now and connect with people from all over the world, so there's a certain milah to it as well. Now, today we're going to be talking about what could we get out of our own personal relationships? How can we strengthen our relationships? Especially when we're counting forward, upwards to Gimel Tammuz. And Gimel Tammuz, year after year, the date comes and the day goes. And as we know, it's a day of Hiskashrus. It's a day for us to stop, to reflect, to connect, and to be able to look deep into our neshama and to try to find and to encourage the chassid within ourselves, Baruch Hashem, and to make sure that there's an ava, as we learned in Tanya last week about Avos Olam and Ava Rabbah, that to be able to develop and to continue to nurture the relationship between a chassid and a rebbe. But not only for ourselves, but for our loved ones, if you have a spouse, if you have children. And the challenge that we face now is to be able to take that and live with it. But most importantly, how do we empower the next generation? But the only way to empower the next generation, I suppose, if we are on fire, if we're empowered, if we're connected. I remember many years ago, there was a mashpia of mine that he said that everybody has to, this was in Yeshiva in Altair, he said, everybody should wake up like a Yid. You should wake up like a chassid. So we asked him, how do you wake up like a Yid? How do you wake up like a chassid? So he said, very simple. I'm a get schlafen wie a chassid. If you go to sleep like a chassid, you'll wake up like a chassid. If you go to sleep and you say Krishma and you make a cheshbon, a nefesh, and you stop and you connect, and you make sure that at the end of the day it is a moment of reckoning for ourselves and thinking about what tomorrow will bring you, Mr. Shem. So he says, automatically, we'll be able to wake up like a chassid. I remember as a kid, my father, Rabbi Junik, who just had his 15th yard site. And I remember as a kid, I used to see my father sit in the kitchen. He used to sit at the kitchen table. And just before he went to sleep at night, he used to sit there with the siddur and say Krishma. And he used to sit with his hand like this for, when I say literally 15 or 20 minutes, my father would sit like this in the kitchen by Kriya Shema. When he said the nighttime Shema, as a kid, we're running around, we paid attention, we didn't pay much attention. But my sister asked him once, what do you think about when you're saying Krishma at night? So he says, I think about my day. I make a cheshbon nefesh, what I did, what I could do. I think about each member of the family, and more importantly, what I could do tomorrow to change in the Yiddishkeit and the Chassidishkeit and everything else is. And for my father, I remember this was something which was real. It was alive. And the fact that even as a kid, those memories are ingrained in me, what it taught me is that sometimes more than telling our children what to do, it's actually about being a role model. It's about them seeing what we are doing, them seeing us. With davening, we're learning. So we're bringing, seeing that our personal relationships are healthy. Now, many of you have seen possibly the story, which was a couple of days ago, that there was the shluchim from Cyprus, Rabbi Yora and Gula Baitz, who happen to actually be cousins of mine, and they're also related to the Yurkoviches in Australia. So to cut a long story short, that a month and a half ago, they had a baby boy, and they were in Cyprus, and they wanted to organize the bris, and it wasn't that simple, and eventually Cyprus went under lockdown, and Eretz Yisrael went under lockdown, and they didn't know what to do. But the parents were very determined that the child has to have a bris. Child has to have a bris, and talking to the government, and to cut a long story short, so what they arranged was, and with the help of our dairy and various different rabbonim and people within the governments, that they got permission for the parents to bring the baby to fly them over to Israel. And when they came to Israel, they weren't allowed to enter the country, because if they enter the country, they have to go into quarantine for 14 days. So they could you imagine? So they had to get a private jet. They landed in Eretz Yisrael. Now, meanwhile, Rabbi Baruch Yurkovich and his family, who are the grandparents, they came to the airport and they took part in the bris, but they were on the other side of the glass because they couldn't cross the border. Because if they go out, they also have to be in quarantine. And Baruch Hashem, the child had the bris. Now, when you think about it for a moment, and I was thinking about it, it's relatives of mine, and I was in touch with them. I'm sure there were plenty of rabbonim that gave a heter that the bris shouldn't take place right then and there. Countries on a lockdown, a world cannot fly out, and it is what it is. You do what you can. But nevertheless, what did the parents do? The parents knew that at the end of the day, it's not about them. This is about their child's relationship with Hashem. And therefore, when it comes to our children's relationships with Hashem, with Yiddishkeit, we have to go the extra mile. And it's not only about pushing them to go the extra mile, it's about us going the extra mile to creating the environment in our homes and in our surroundings that it's such that the children are able to grow and to go with it. And another interesting point is, when it comes to our bris, what do we say? To take the child in to the bris of Avram Avinu. And the question is, why do we mention the bris of Avram Avinu? Why don't we say to bring the child in to the bris of Hashem? But nevertheless, what do we know is that Hashem was the first one, that Avram Avinu was the first one that had Mesiras Nefesh for a bris. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that our children have that same level of Mesiras Nefesh, and therefore this is done through this, through the idea. So by them, this child will always know that it's a child of Mesiras Nefesh, that the relationship between the child and Hashem is such that there was a lot invested in it. Now let's take a look as we go closer to the Maimer and try to see, I mentioned before that, first of all, Ashgacha Pratis, this week's parsha is also B'Haba Chukoisai, and this Maimer was said in Shas V'Vachim Sivan Mem Gimel, which is 1983. I think one of the greatest challenges which we all face, I face, and that is to make sure that our relationships aren't a hit and run. Many times, whilst we're with our spouse and with our children, and even our relationship with our personal self, if we have confidence within ourselves, if we believe in ourselves, many times they're a hit and run. Whilst we're involved in something, we're connected, but otherwise, life goes on, and we don't necessarily always feel it and see it. So here in this moment, the Rebbe is going to take the whole idea of a relationship, and the Rebbe is going to give us the tools, based as it happens by Ashgacha Pratis on this week's parsha, how are we going to be able to take those relationships, first and foremost, the relationship within ourselves. Many of us are sitting at home, whether you have family or not, people are in isolation, people have lonely moments, people have questions of faith. His kashrus is very challenging in the best of times, how much more so now? So the question is, how do we develop a relationship which will be able to have the strength that it needs to be able to take things forward? So we'll start learning of the Maimer. And what we'll do is, so we'll go through different points of the Maimer here, and we'll develop it. So the Maimer begins, so the parsha is like this: if you follow in my chukim, Aaron, I'm saying the Maimer inside, okay, yeah? So, if you follow in my chukim, and I will give you rain in the season. So what we see here from the parsha, that the parsha connects very clearly doing mitzvahs with a physical reward. So the Rebbe asked a very simple but brilliant question. The question is, what does it mean when the Torah says, if you follow my chukim? The lechaira, harei inyan chukoisai chukim, ukemaimir azal, chukah chakakti, gezeir gazarti, ve'ein lechor rishus laharer achareha. Nahainu showin yinachuke b'mais b'pel she'einu shayach lehir b'avona. The Rebbe asked a very simple question, a beautiful question. It says like this: what is a chok? A chok is, we know there are three categories of mitzvahs. Eidus is testimony. Hashem created the world in 6 days and rested on Shabbos. Pesach, he took us out of Mitzrayim. Shavuos was Matan Torah. So Eidus is the testimony to a time. Mishpatim is civil laws. Don't drive on the bus lane, the way we conduct ourselves. And chukim is a chok. We don't know the reason for it. Shatnez, kashrus, and etc. So the question there is, a chok is a mitzvah which we don't know the reason for. As much as kavanah you want to have, you won't be able to have deep kavanah in the meaning of the mitzvah. Why? Because we don't know the ins and outs of it. You either do it or you don't. So the Rebbe asked the question, how could you say, I will grow? Telechu means to grow, to elevate yourself, to go from one level to the next. If we don't know the reasons for a chok, you can't grow in the mitzvah. Well, because you cannot have a deep understanding, you cannot have deeper kavanah. So the question is, so at the end of the day, how do we say Teilechu? Because there's no journey in this mitzvah. And then the Rebbe continues and he says that, look, when it comes to, let's say for example, to put on tefillin, right? So he says, whether it's Moshe Rabbeinu, Ba'ada Poshet Shepip Shutim, or a very simple Jew, Shabbat Kol Adoros, Kulam Manichem Oisim HaTefillin B'Dalet Batim Parshas. When it comes to putting on tefillin, for example, right? Whether it's Moshe Rabbeinu, you or I, we all put on the same tefillin, we all get the same mitzvah. The same thing would be when you're lighting Shabbos candles or any mitzvah that you're doing, you're either doing or not doing the mitzvah, right? But when we say that there's a difference in mitzvahs, this is only only in the kavanah, in the intent of the mitzvah. When it comes to the actual action, you're either doing or not doing the mitzvah. So the bottom line is, the question that the Rebbe asks is, why does the Torah say, I will go in my chukim? You have nowhere to go. You have no kavanah. We don't know the reason for a chok. So how could you grow in the mitzvah? You could get a mitzvah for doing the mitzvah, but not for having kavanah and taking it to a very, very deep level. And then further on, if we go to about 8 lines before the end of the first paragraph, and here it's really very brilliant. You see how the Rebbe takes a pasuk. The Rebbe takes a pasuk and puts it down in a very clear fashion, explains it to us, and eventually we'll be able to walk away with a take-home message. With 7 paragraphs from the first, we have to understand. If you're following my mitzvahs, I will give you rain. So we're talking about that what? That you will get physical reward for the mitzvahs. So the Rebbe continues and he says, but 1 minute. We know schar mitzvah. What is the reward of a mitzvah? To do another mitzvah. The schar mitzvah, the reward of a mitzvah is the Gan Eden. So why are we saying very openly, if you do my mitzvahs, I will give you rain, I will give you physical reward. The reward of a mitzvah is the Gan Eden. The reward of a mitzvah is in the world to come. So he says, really what it should have said is, if you do my mitzvahs, you'll be rewarded in the Gan Eden, and you'll also have a good life, as a by the way. But to tell us very openly and clearly, if you do my mitzvahs, I'll give you rain, I'll give you parnasa. Since when do we do mitzvahs? Only for bread and butter. 100% we need bread and butter, and we should all have parnasa b'harchava mitzvah. But the Torah always, we always are told, do a mitzvah for the sake of Hashem. It shouldn't be for Gashmi's Dikar rewards. So now, here in the second paragraph, the Rebbe is going to take the whole idea of doing a mitzvah and the whole idea of bichukoisai, and the Rebbe is going to take it forward in a very, very beautiful way. And he says as follows, the end of the first page. When the kudus habiyah b'kol zehu, what's the idea? The mashakasav kan loshim chukoisai, eini rak me'inyan chuka, elagam loshim chakika. When the Torah talks and tells us, im chukoisai telechu, if you follow my mitzvahs, he's not only talking about a very narrow band of mitzvahs, which is called a chok, but he's talking about a more general approach to our approach to mitzvahs. And that is, miloshin chakika, that when you're doing a mitzvah, the mitzvah has to be engraved in you, has to become a part and parcel of who you are. That means that we're doing a mitzvah. It shouldn't be a hit and run. I'm doing the mitzvah, it's fine, but the moment I finish doing the mitzvah, I totally forget that I davened, that I learned, that I did an act of chesed. And here, the Ma'aber is going to continue and tell us a few different examples. The Ma'aber continues and says that when we take a look, we'll see that when the Torah was given to us, there are various different levels. So he says, you have the written Torah, and you have the oral Torah. Aseres HaDibros, and the Aseres HaDibros, the Ten Commandments, Hachalukim Meluchos, which are engraved in the luchos. And what the Rebbe tells us here, very interesting idea, that is as follows: is that when you take a look at the different parts of the Torah, what you'll see is something very fascinating. A Sefer Torah and Tefillin and Mezuzahs is ink on parchment. Now, the ink and the parchment are both two separate things. And what you do is, you take the ink and you put it on the parchment, and suddenly the ink and the parchment become one. But the reality is that the ink could come off the parchment. How many of us have ever been in shul, and suddenly there's a shiloh in the Sefer Torah, is it kosher, isn't it kosher? They're not sure if the letter is perfect. How many times do we check out mezuzahs or tefillin? Sometimes it's not 100% always clear, and the letter's not precise. If I could ask if everybody doesn't mind just to mute yourself. Thank you. So what we have with the Sefer Torah, tefillin, and mezuzahs, that there are times that even though the ink and parchment become one, nevertheless, they can part from each other and go their own way. But when you take a look at the luchos were engraved through and through. So the letters of the alphabets, whichever way you looked at it, it was one thing that it could never part from one from another. And the very same thing is with us in our own Avodas Hashem. And this next piece, on the second page, the middle piece of Bir Adam, really takes this idea and I think and presents it in a way that we could plug in, we could connect to it, and we could actually look at our own personal relationships and see how we can take it forward in a way to make it even more meaningful and make it even more special. So Bir Ha'inyan B'Avodas Adam. Let's take a look at it. What does it mean in our day-to-day lives? Hine yesh pa'amim, there are times, shehis achdus ha'adam im ha'torah shaloimed. There are times when you're sitting down and you're learning Torah, or v'im ha'mitzvah shemekayim, or you're sitting down and you're doing a mitzvah. Hi b'derech sheim shnei dvarim ha'mechabrim. So it could be we're sitting down to learn now. We're learning. You're doing a mitzvah, doing whatever it may be. So we're taking us and the Torah that we're learning, us and the mitzvah that we're doing are two separate things. But what's happening now? We are bringing them together and they are becoming one. But because it was our choice, we all made a commitment, for me this morning, for you this evening, to connect to Zoom and to learn. So what we did is we took ourselves, our Gashmidik self that has a neshama within us, and we made a decision to connect it with Torah. And now when we're learning, us and the Torah, us and Hashem becomes one. However, but because it was a choice that we made, there is a possibility that after we finish learning, we close the Sefer, or we walk away from the Zoom, and we don't necessarily feel the rest of the evening that I'm somebody that just learned something, that my life was changed, that the way I think, the way I do things, my connection to Hashem is more alive. But then, the yesh avodas nalis yoser. There's sometimes an avodah that we can have, which is even greater. Sha'adam ovid avadasai k'moi be'osis hachakika. That a person is davening or learning, or we're spending time with our loved ones in a way that we're there, we're present, we're fully focused. And we cherish those moments in such a beautiful way that long after you light the Shabbos candles, long after you take off your tefillin, or long after you close the Tehillim, throughout the day or the morning, we feel like, oh, here's a Yid that davened, here's a Yid that learned, here's somebody that is connected with their inner core, with their essence, with themselves. Shahis akdusa ima Torah ba mitzvahs. Somebody that's learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, he ba'oifin shenasim ledavar echad mamish. Did I ever write the word mamish? That we become one with Hashem. V'iyaf shalahafid b'neim klal, and you can never take it and part it, and we will never feel that disconnect. So what we see from here is that what is the key to a healthy relationship? How do we make sure that our relationships are such that long after we invested in it, the feeling is there? It has to be ba'oifin, it has to be in a way of hakika. It has to be in a way that it's fully 100% engraved within ourselves. Now, what does it mean for a relationship to be engraved within ourselves? What does it mean? It's not simple at all to be able to be in a relationship and say, you know what, 24/7, I'm thinking of the relationship. 24/7, my mind is such that I'm always there, I'm always connected to it, and I never take my mind off it. You know, on a human level, we know it's very difficult. You know, one of the reasons why one does Kiddushin, marriage, with the ring, for this very reason. You have a constant reminder on your finger. So I want to share with you, so Aaron mentioned earlier, Baruch Hashem, you know, through my father, I had a zechus to be around the Rebbe, a little on the Rebbetzin, and my siblings, myself, and I just want to share with you, I remember a conversation it was a particular Friday night, and my father used to go many times on a Friday night to the Rebbetzin, and when we were kids, he used to take us along with. Sometimes we would stay on, other times we would go, and then my father would stay. And then, as myself and my brothers became older, we Baruch Hashem had a schus that we were helping around the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin and preparing things for their own private quarters. So we Baruch Hashem were there as well. So I remember there was once I was there with a few of my brothers, and we were speaking with the Rebbetzin. It happened to be on a Friday night. And one of my brothers was older than me, and he mentioned something about the Friedrich Rebbe and her father, and the Rebbe Rashab, her grandfather. And generally, the Rebbe Tzachai Mushke, when he spoke about her family history, when he spoke about her father, her grandfather, and if she knew what you were talking about, if she saw that it was precious, she would talk, she would share. And I just remember this memory that my brother mentioned something about the Tata and the Zayder, her father, the Friedrich Rebbe, and the Rebbe Rashab, and the Rebbetzin started talking about her father, and she started describing, and she told us a story about, you know, the olden days in Lubavitch, and she said, "Dog gesetz in the Tata, dog gesetz in the Zayde. Here was sitting my father, here was sitting my grandfather," and she was describing what happened back in Lubavitch as if it was happening right then and there in front of us. And I remember then I was a bacher, maybe 15, 16 years old. And I remember listening to her speak and the way she was describing what was going on. And what really took me was that the Rebbetzin, her upbringing in Lubavitch, her father was a Rebbe, her Zayde was a Rebbe, she's married to the Rebbe. And when she spoke about it, she described it as if she was living it at this very moment. And that is really when we talk about Hakika, or relationship, is to be able to be at that level. You know, Friday night, Shabbos, right? Friday night Shabbos. So it's, you know, something I started doing, a very practical thing, which you know, there's somebody here in London. His name is Tzvi Inglis, and many years ago, I remember he said that at a Shabbos table, so there's a book called Yimei Chabad, Days of Chabad. So he said at a Shabbos table, he reads every week from Yimei Chabad, or the English one, Days of Chabad. He gives so much information about the Rebbes, the Rebbetzin, and the Chassidim, and it really, you know, enhances the whole Shabbos table, whether it's for yourself, if you're on your own, or with your family. And I started doing that myself, and what I noticed is that you create an environment where people feel Hashem, where people feel the Rebbe, people feel Lubavitch left, that Lubavitch is alive. And it's about investing in that relationship. And it's not something that comes easy. You know, even, you know, some of us had a schus to be around before Gimel Tammuz and see the Rebbe, and many others weren't around physically at that time. But the reality is, even somebody that was around before Gimel Tammuz, we don't always feel connected. We're human. We have distractions. And we even had distractions before Gimel Tammuz. Nevertheless, what do we know is that, my father-in-law, Rabbi Shmuel Lu, he came from Williamsburg. His father, David Lu, was a lawyer that doesn't come from a Lubavitch family. And my Shver and his sister, Himtzelangayar, Mrs. Mindy Feller, the brothers and sisters, my father, Shmuel Lu, and the rest of the family are Litvische, some of them are Gedolim. It's a whole, right? And my Shver came to Lubavitch. He came to Lubavitch and he used to walk from Williamsburg to Crown Heights to be at the Rebbe's Farbrengens. And once when he was by the Rebbe, he asked the Rebbe that he wants to be Mikush, he wants to be connected to the Rebbe. What should he do? So the Rebbe told him, do what I do. Learn Nigel and learn Chassidus. That's what Iskashrus is all about. So when we're talking about Hakika, that our relationship should be engraved, first and foremost, we have to look at ourselves. It's very easy for all of us, including myself, it's always easy for us to talk to others, to try to inspire others, to speak to other people. But in truth, the first thing we have to ask is what's happening with ourselves. Yes, it's true. If you want to grow yourself, and if I want to grow, what we got to do, when you teach others, automatically we grow ourselves. I heard last week, just our former chief rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sachs. So he had like a 6-minute clip. And so I was looking at it last week, and he said something quite profound. He said that, we all know Jonathan Sachs, a strong connection with the Rebbe, and he spoke many times how before he became chief rabbi, he sat down with his family and he asked his family permission to write to the Rebbe to get a bracha, etc. But what he described here was, he said is that that when he was in England and one of his Rosh Yeshivas, his mentors from Yeshiva, told him, if you want to be a Rav, you want to be a teacher, then he said, if you want to grow yourself in learning, the only way to do it is to start teaching others. So he says that he remembered that he went to then Jews College here in London, and he came in as one of the faculty teaching, even though he himself was a student. Listen, he was a brilliant mind, so he was able to do it. So therefore, I think the first and most important thing is Hakika, we have to be at peace with ourselves. How many of us are carrying baggage from the past, from the present, from years ago, from our childhood? And many of us were in situations which were challenging. It could be family life, it could be schooling, parnasa-wise, health-wise, people's amunah are shaken at times. There's so many different things that happen on a daily basis to us. So I think the first and foremost is what we learn from Parashat Ba'arach Hakika. The first thing is be at peace with yourself. We have to know we're human. Nobody expects us to be perfect. What our job is to invest in the relationship with Hashem. If every night we make a cheshbon nefesh and we stop and we focus and we ask what our day was about. If when we're davening, just put an extra 5 minutes into our davening. Take one of the Allelukas, take one of the things and focus, try to connect with it. That's what building a relationship is all about. If you have a sefer, a book, right? So imagine this sefer here, right? So imagine if I haven't used this in years, it would be covered in dust. So what do I need to do? I need to blow the dust off the cover of the sefer, of the book, the sefer, and then it shines. The same thing as our neshama. If we don't feel at times that our relationship with Hashem is alive and we're really connected and we're accepting what Hashem is doing, even though we have questions, what we got to do is blow the dust off our neshama. We got to invest in our relationship. And when we invest in our relationship between Hashem and ourselves, and every day when we say the Hallelujahs, we recognize the Eibishter created the sun, the moon, the stars, the brachas around us, and everything that we have, suddenly we say, you know what? I may be sitting alone, but I'm not alone. Hashem is listening. Hashem is talking to me. I have a relationship with Hashem. I connect with Him. And everybody connects in different ways. As long as it's connected to the Torah mitzvahs, we connect. His bodiness, meditation, but everything has to be done up in limud achsidus and dark achsidus. The first and foremost is our relationship with Hashem ourselves. And then automatically, if you have a spouse, you have children, grandchildren, a family, what happens automatically will be that first and foremost, the way we're living and our environment will rub off on others. but also we'll have the courage to be able to create that environment. Now, I remember about 3-4 years ago, so there was a young man in our shul here in Beis Gabriel in London, and he's moved now to Los Angeles, where his wife family comes from. So I remember I was sitting with him, and I was talking to him about the shul, and Baruch Hashem, shul Beis Gabriel, a young community. We just built a new building. There's a lot of good and wonderful things going on. At the same time, there's a lot of things that we could still do. So I asked him, what is the best way to inspire our young generation? He's a young guy, married a few years. I asked him, what's the best way to inspire? He said to me, Rabbi, don't try too hard. Don't try too hard. He says, just try to be who you are. Be a role model. When people see the way you're davening, the way you're learning, and everything else is automatically, this will inspire others. Many times we think, that we're here to tell people what to do, to impose on people. On the contrary, the greatest way of hakika, of allowing other people to be engraved, is for us to live as role models. I know it's not always simple, and there are various different situations which things don't always work the way we want it, and we need to have Hashem's brachas for it to work. But the reality is that the more we invest in our relationship with Hashem, the more we'll be able to create that environment around us. So therefore we all know with our own children, we could sit and tell them what to do, or we could try to create that environment, So we come to a Shabbos table, or even now during lockdown, families are eating together more. What's important is prepare what you're going to say. It doesn't always have to be a dvar Torah, a tifah vart, but something positive, something nice, something that's going to bring out the togetherness of the family. That is hakika. That is about things being engraved. Now, I just want to, and then I'll just finish off with another nikud of the mimer before we open up the questions and answers, and also if anybody wants to share anything. So as we look further in the mimer, so on the second side, the last paragraph. On the second side, the last paragraph. So she says, "V'zeu im chukaisai." This is if you follow my chukim, the koyi akol Torah mitzvah. We're talking about all the Torah and all the mitzvahs. V'lo yirak beluchis hachakukim. It says we're not only talking about a chok. Imagine you meet a non-frum person or even a non-Jew, and he says, "Tell me about Yiddishkeit." Would you tell him a chok, a mitzvah that we don't know the reason? It's probably not. You'll first tell him about Shabbos, about Yom Tov. So the Maimer says that when we talk about chukaisai, we're not just talking about the narrow band of mitzvahs that are chukim, mitzvahs that we don't know the reason. We're talking about here the mitzvahs in general. Ki adam tzarech lavad avadasai gam bechol haTorah v'mitzvahs. The way you do your avodah, you're learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, should be be'ofen shel chukah meloshen chakika. So make sure when you're doing a mitzvah, long after you finish doing the mitzvah, you are inspired. And you're walking around as somebody that was inspired and still is inspired. It should be in such a way that that inspiration doesn't part. If you take a marriage, a relationship between a husband and a wife, a relationship between parents and children, and the truth is even our own personal relationship with ourselves, how many times are the times that we feel connected, we feel close to a family member, to a loved one, but then somebody says something happens, and we don't feel that. The challenge is, what does it mean to have a relationship in the way of hakika that is engraved? That even if there's a hump and a bump on the way, and there's something, we have to know the connection is there. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, the shaila is, if when we do a mitzvah, we're connected to Hashem. If when somebody does the opposite of a mitzvah, we're disconnected from Hashem, so how does it work? Are you connected or not? So the Alter Rebbe describes, and it was in Tanya from a couple of weeks ago, he says, Ki Yaakov chevel nachalosei. Yiddishkeit is like a rope. A rope is a bunch of strands. So if somebody does something that we shouldn't do, so maybe a little of the strand gets ripped off, but the heart, the rope is still connected. So just like with our loved ones, when sometimes there's a moment where it's a bit challenging or it's a bit difficult, or a voice was raised, or we don't feel that connected, we know, listen, but we are connected. So the challenge that we have is, we have to make sure that always when we communicate with our loved ones, the message should be in such a way, not that we're just expressing anger and expressing upset, but investing in a relationship with our loved ones means that when we say something, we can ask ourselves, am I saying something that's going to help them see what they should do in a positive way, or am I just going to express my own frustration? If we get upset about something and we express our own frustration, we scream, All our children, imagine you walk into a child's room and it's messy. It's such a mess. What's going on? Look what's going on. All the child hears is what? That we don't like a mess. And it's bothering me, my ego. I don't like a mess. But if we go in and we think, okay, there's a situation. Now, what can I say to help my child that they should see the importance of having a clean room? I could walk in and say, you know what? I would love to take a walk with you or play a game or sit and chat, but maybe if you want some help, I'm happy to help you to put things away. To try to think before we say something, are we pouring more oil on the fire, or is this going to help the relationship pull forward? And finally, just one more aspect of the mimer, and that is as follows. So he says that, so how does a person, he says, how will a person come to a madrega, to a level to become one with Hashem? It's not about going to the Himalayas or sitting on a mountain and meditating for 6 months. It's through doing physical mitzvahs. When you do a physical mitzvah, that's where you find the Eibster. That's how you connect in the most amazing way. So now let's go back to the original question of the Maimer. If you follow my mitzvahs, I'll give you rain in the season. The question is, how could we say you're going to get rain? Rain is a physical reward. And we know the reward of mitzvahs are spiritual. The Rebbe points out, and he finishes off with the Maimer, he says like this. He says that when a person does the Aveda, that they become one with the Hashem who gave the Torah, one with Hashem who did the mitzvahs, at that level, see, if you're doing a mitzvah based on our own understanding, so then when it's a chok, you cannot grow in the mitzvah, because we know the reason. But if you're connecting, when you're learning Torah, doing a mitzvah with the essence of Hashem, above and beyond the Gashmis, the physical world, then at that level, you could go, you could grow and grow and grow. So therefore is the secret of the way to invest in our relationship with Hashem, and for it to be Hakik engraved, is to go above and beyond, go out of our comfort zone. Make sure that we practice Yiddishkeit as much as we're comfortable, but we stretch ourselves a little bit. We go above and beyond, and what happens automatically is, then we're connecting at a higher level, which even if we don't know the reason, but we're connecting with the essence of Hashem. And finally, the Rebbe says, so therefore is, if you're doing a mitzvah in Be'efen Shel Chakika, right? So what does it mean? The Eibster will give you a physical reward. Because you're using everything you have for Kedusha, for Torah, and for mitzvahs, so the physical reward is not physical, it's really ruchnius. So when the Sadik Yishmeichem Beitim, so what he's saying is that just like your furniture in your home is you, why? Because that's who you are exactly. The same thing is, if you connect with a level with Hashem at such a level that whatever you have, you use for ruchnius, whether it's paying for school fees, giving tzedakah, making sure your home has what they need, and doing good things with it, so then your physical reward is not gashmis, it's ruchnius. So the Eibster looks down and he says, I'll give you even more gashmis, because our gashmis is ruchnius, because our connection to Hashem is such that everything is used in a way to try to see how we could further our avodah to Hashem, and not just for ourselves, for us. And I think also is that, as we're coming now, instead we're not counting down, we're counting towards Gimel Tammuz. And in truth, who would have ever thought? I remember before Gimel Tammuz, and even after Chav Zayin Adar, after the Rebbe had a stroke, and then a second stroke, and even when Gimel Tammuz happened, everybody was hoping, the Rebbe gave us such a munah for Mashiach. We were hoping that Rebbe still will find a way that Mashiach should come. But the truth is, we have to know that we don't write the script. The Eibster writes the script. We know what we have to do. We know what the Rebbe wants of us to do. We don't always feel that much connected. We haven't possibly seen the Rebbe. The reality is, and each and every one of us knows it from our own day-to-day life, when you're learning a sikha, in whatever language it is, or you're hearing a vart, when you're doing mivtzoyim, when we're trying to connect to Chassidish Maaseh, just try to take a few minutes and let's connect to an idea, how the Rebbe takes an idea of our own personal life, a Yiddishkeit, and gives us a take-home message that changes us. There's so many ways we could feel the Rebbe. So I think, what our Avodah of Gimel Tammuz is for us and our families, it's about over the next 5, 6, 7 weeks, creating the environment in the house in a positive way, in a non-threatening way, and in a non-imposing way. But just like when I said, when the Rebbe said the story, then she was alive. She was expressing it. The message is, let's be present in our own personal life. Let's be present in the life of our spouses and of our children, our loved ones, grandchildren. And if we're chakika, if we're one with them, if there's a healthy relationship physically, automatically, hopefully something will rub off from our ruchnius and we'll even be able to share it with them. But for that, you need to have preparation. For that, we need to, we don't get up in the morning and just daven without preparing ourselves. And finally, I remember this was pre-lockdown. I was driving here in there's a place called the Marketplace, which is near Kingsley Way, just near where the yeshiva is in the Hampstead Garden suburb. So I actually went to pick my kids up from the bus stop, from the coach after school. So I was parked in front of one of the stores, one of the shops there. And I remember seeing there was a mother, happened to be a mother and a daughter. The daughter was maybe 16, 17. They were both texting on phones and talking to each other. And when I was in the car looking at it from far, it could have been me with one of my children walking and talking and texting. But when I was sitting in the car and I was looking at the mother and daughter, I thought to myself, what a shame. They're walking in the street, they're talking to each other. So why both of them text and have 6 conversations at the same time whilst they have precious time to talk to each other? And what made me notice it only is when I saw somebody else do it. And finally, I remember, the Rebbe would come in Erev Shabbos to be with the Rebbetzin for a few minutes before Shabbos. The Rebbe wasn't always present when the Rebbetzin benched Shabbos Licht. And I myself wouldn't want to be present when the Rebbe was there. We would always leave. But there were times that happened that we did because we were preparing things for Shabbos. We would always stay out of our way unless the Rebbe needed something or asked something. But one thing I remember, the Rebbe would sometimes walk in to the library next door to 770 before Shabbos. The Rebbe was there for a minute or two maybe. For that minute or two, you could see the Rebbe was present. The Rebbe was fully there, talking to the Rebbetzin. If I could say the eye-to-eye contact or just everything. It was just a minute or two, for us, a minute or two, 3 sometimes, it doesn't mean much. But sometimes just seeing it from the side, you can see how precious being in those moments were. So David says, that we should have the strength as we are preparing now for Gimel Tammuz. We should say, Ashrei Matev Chalkeinu, Baruch Hashem, we're Yidden. Baruch Hashem, we have an Neshama, which is a Chelek Al-Kamim Mamash, a part of Hashem. Baruch Hashem, Chsidim. We're connected to the Rebbe. And it's not about beating ourselves up, more connected, less connected. It's not about that. It's about Ma'aseh B'Perel, it's about action. What can I do today to enhance my relationship with the Eibishter, with myself, with my loved ones, through the Rebbe, through Chassidus, so through Lubavitch. And at the end of the day, just like Simchas Torah, the Sefters want to jump out of the Oren Kodesh and dance. We are the Rebbe's hands and feet now, and very soon, and today and now Mamish, David will hope that we'll all do our part in bringing forth the coming of Mashiach, and Mr. Shem will be together. Mashiach will take us out of Golus. We'll be together with the Rebbe, and we'll be able to stand there and say, Baruch Hashem, I did what I can, and we'll go all together to Yerushalayim in HaKodesh, b'mehei v'yameinu Mamish. Chaim, Chaim.
L'chaim. Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Junik. If there's anyone that has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Menachem, it's Remy. Thank you so much. I really want to say I appreciate your time and the effort that you've put in to come to speak to us today. It's wonderful to hear your voice once again. And it's always wonderful to hear so inspirational words. I was actually listening to a talk by Rabbi Michal Garari just before I came on this talk, and he mentioned one of the points that you were mentioning is that mitzvahs today are so easy to do that you can just go, for example, Hanukkah, you can just go and buy the little things that you clip off and, you can just make the oil. It's right there. And even, B'dikas chametz, they have the little chametz pieces already in a packet for you. How do you prepare for the mitzvah these days when mitzvahs are so easily accessible? How do you make it lichtig? How do you make it that preparation? How do your kids see that the mitzvah takes time to do and it's moiridik and it's, we do things that are, above the letter of the law?
Right. Thank you, Remy, and also once again, thank you for organizing this. Look, I think the most important thing and the first thing what we need to have is structure in our lives. There's a danger sometimes, with davening at home for so long, people can get used to davening at home, right? But at the same time there's a great opportunity to daven at home. Why? Because you set yourself a time for yourself, with your children, or whoever else is in the family, you could put some extra time into davening. There's no pressure of anybody else standing there. Really, mitzvahs is a personal thing between us and Hashem. And we're so used, everything is done in such a public way, and we have to fit into everybody else's life. I think what's happening now is, and it's almost like, we are the Kohen Gadol. We are going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, to the Holy of Holies every day, every moment. We're going into the Holy of Holies. Shachris, Menachem, Ma'ariv, you're doing a mitzvah.
Yeah, you can.
So I think
I just want to, no, but you can't because you got my picture, and I better turn my picture off for a second.
As long as we set aside time every day and make sure that we create the right boundaries to be able to do the mitzvah, right? Ein kedusha b'li Hachono, there's no holiness without preparation. So as long as you create the right environment around you and you focus to it, if we daven one day in the dining room, one day in the kitchen, one day in the bedroom, one day here, there, now, not everybody has the space to be able to have extra rooms to daven when the kids are in school.
You can see.
Nevertheless, when everybody sees that everything is done properly. I remember many years ago, so my older brother Shamshi, I was visiting him in New York, and I was in his house, and he filled himself up a cup of water and he made a bracha loud, and I answered Amen. So I said to him, Shamshi, since when do you make brachas loud? What got into you? I said, what's going on? He said, no. He said, simple. If I want my kids to make brachas properly, I got to do it myself. So you're making a bracha, you make it loud. And we finished eating, right? You sit down and you make alamichi or your bench after breakfast, lunch, and supper, and the kids see that. So I think it's about, one of the things that we're missing now is actually having boundaries and how everything fits into place. Because it's very easy when we went to shul, whether it's during the week or Shabbos, you went to a farbrengen, you want to do a mitzvah. But if we have that focus and we put ourselves into the right frame of mind, then we allow it to flourish.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? I see some familiar faces. People that I know from the past, connected to Al-Qaeda, others. Guys, one more question, one more comment.
If the floor is open, can I just jump in for a second? It's not directly linked to the actual mimer itself. More, I guess, at a personal level. As Rabbi Gordon mentioned earlier, your family and you in particular had a unique connection with the Rebbe. And my question to you is it possible to share with us a story that's not sort of a wow or miracle, which is quite popular, but a story that's more personal, more sort of gives a glimpse of the Rebbe in a more personal manner? Something which happened maybe at home or when you were there that, for us that don't have access to that story, it would be quite inspirational and quite moving. So I'm not sure you can or you want to share it, but if the time allows or the will is there to do it, can you share a story with us that gives us an insight into the Rebbe, which we would have not gotten without that?
Right, okay, yeah. First of all, do you mind just, if you move the mimer away, I'll be able to open up the screen.
Remy, please move it away. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say, I see Shimon sitting here, Shimon Joseph, and I just want to say Yashikech because I spent 2 years in South Africa as a Bachar Shlich in his house. I learned as well, so don't worry about it. And so just being Makatov. Right, okay, I'll share with you. Right, let me, right. So I'll share with you two things, right? I'll share with you two things. I'll share with you, first of all, is something that's very different, just a personal thing that happened a bit behind closed doors, which is not something that one hears or sees on a regular basis. And so two things. So number one is that at the time of the Lebanon war, I remember the Rebbe spoke at the Farbrengen. The Rebbe spoke at the Farbrengen very strongly that Israel started the job and that they should finish it. One shouldn't do any haphazards. And the Rebbe spoke many times about the Israeli government starting something and not finishing it. So I remember the Rebbe spoke about the Farbrengen then. This was in the early 80s. The Rebbe spoke about the Farbrengen. And then after Shabbos, there was a whole story in itself. But I ended up going with the Rebbetzin in her car back to the Rebbe's house on 1304 President Street. I was 15 years old maybe, and I was driving, and I was in the car with the Rebbetzin going back to the after Shabbos when she went from the library, which she came for Shabbos in the later years. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin spent it in the Rebbe's library next door to 770. So after Shabbos that week, I went with the Rebbetzin back to the house, and as we were driving in the car, so I turned to the Rebbetzin and I said, the Rebbe de Farbrengen spoke today about the Lebanon War and how they have to finish it. And suddenly the Rebbetzin almost like continued what the Rebbe said about the Farbrengen. And she said, yes, 100%, that they shouldn't start something and not finish it because it's dangerous for everybody in Eretz Yisrael. And I just found it was just very interesting is how the Rebbetzin in some way, just almost continued what the Rebbe was saying earlier at the Farbrengen, because generally, when we spoke to the Rebbetzin, we wouldn't sit and, just talk about the Rebbe like that. The Rebbe's the Rebbe. There were different times when things came up. But I want to share with you just a bit of an in-house story, which I see that is being recorded. And, I'm not making a big secret of it, but at the same time I'm just sharing it here on this platform. And I see, some familiar faces and other new faces. I see Hachono, who has a brother here, who's doing great stuff. So when the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin won the library, and this started in the early 1980s, so my brothers and myself, we used to change it from a library into a living quarters for the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin to be. It was a library full of Sfarim, and the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin were coming for Shabbos. So we had to organize it, set it up, bring the food from the Rebbe's house, and set the table, make sure that it's, everything is there what's needed. So I remember there was once, Rabbi Krinsky, Yudel Krinsky, he called me up, and he said to me, Menachem, he says that the Rebbetzin wants to buy a new chandelier. And so I was thinking, I'll bring it to the Rebbe's library, and when she comes, you show it to her. I said, okay, fine. Anyways, he drops off from the Rebbe's library next door to 770, a box like this, a box, and I put the box down. And then suddenly I start thinking to myself, 1 minute, how's the Rebbetzin going to know what the box is like, right? It's a chandelier, what it looks like unless I take it out. So I take it out, and it had hundreds of crystals that had to be put on. So then I thought to myself, if the crystals aren't on, the Rebbetzin wonder what it looks like. So I got a chaver of mine. I went out to 770 and I found somebody I knew. I said, come in with me. And I took him into the back room, and we put the crystals on the chandelier. And anyways, he left. And I said, good, when the Rebbetzin comes, I'll show her the chandelier. But then my mind is working. So I started thinking to myself 1 minute, looking at the chandelier, unless it's hanging, one won't be able to see what it looks like properly, right? I was thinking b'das tachten. I was thinking as, a kid, whatever. And I'm sure, once I got married, I knew how much more so that one has to be able to, anyway, so then some of you may remember, now when you go to 770, you have the tashlich, which is just in the back of where the big sukkah is. The tashlich used to be in the back of the Rebbe's library. And then in the late 70s, the early 80s, they took away the tashlich, which was the back room of behind the Rebbe's library. They moved it where it's now, in the back of the big sukkah, and they built an extension to the Rebbe's library. So that extension at that time was built, but it wasn't fully ready yet. And there was a beautiful bookcase that was put into that room of the Rebbe's library. So what I decided to do is, I took the chandelier and I hung it up on one of the shelves with a string, with a wire. So when the Rebbetzin comes, at least you'll see the chandelier is there and is hanging. And, hopefully if she wants it for the house, she'll take it. So that wasn't my thing, but that's how my mind worked. And then I thought, I need to plug it in, but that was a step too far for me. I couldn't do that. Anyway, so I hung the chandelier up on the shelves of a bookcase, right? So the bookcase, and then I closed the door to the back room. Anyways, Erev Shabbos, the Rebbetzin came, and the Rebbetzin came in, and she sat. Now when the Rebbetzin came into the library, there was a long table in the dining room. So when the Rebbetzin came in before Shabbos, she sat at the end of the table, just where she came in, because the Rebbe would come in every Shabbos, and she would speak to the Rebbe for a few minutes, at the end of the table. And then for the Shabbos meal, the Rebbetzin would actually walk, so the Rebbetzin would sit on the other side because the head of the table was on the other side. Anyways, so the Rebbetzin is in the library. So I opened up the two doors and I told her that, Rabbi Krinsky sent the chandelier. And I opened the two doors and I'm standing inside and I'm talking to her about the chandelier, right? Ich bin nicht kein Maven, I don't know much about it, but I'm showing it to her, I'm talking to her. Now, as I'm talking to her, and I turn around and I gave a look, the Rebbe is standing right beside her. The Rebbe is standing right beside her. Now, generally, I said when the Rebbe came, nobody would want to be there. It's the Rebbe's Heilige time, and that's the education I got from my father, and that, unless one had to be there. So the Rebbe is standing there. Now, generally, if the Rebbe ever came and the Rebbe was talking to somebody, the Rebbe would not so-called interrupt. So I pick up, first I was facing the front, and then I turn around and I see the Rebbe standing there quietly, just next to the Rebbetzin. So I was like, I just didn't know what to do. So I turned and I said, the Rebbe. So I said, the Rebbe. And I quickly went into a corner, just like there was a curtain by the wall, not to be seen. So the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin started talking to each other. First they spoke in Yiddish, they spoke about it in Russian, then they spoke again in Yiddish. And then the Rebbetzin turned to the Rebbe and asked the Rebbe, I don't remember, do or ear, he said, was sagst du von Lustre? Lustre in chandelier means a chandelier, in Russian means a chandelier. So the Rebbetzin asked the Rebbe, what do you say about the chandelier? So the Rebbe looks and he's trying to see where the chandelier is. So I stepped out and I pointed with my hand and I walked towards the other room. So the Rebbe walked like the length of about 4 or 5 chairs to the other side of the table and towards that door. And the Rebbe looked for a second. And then the Rebbe walked back to her and the Rebbe said that they will speak later on by Suda Shabbos. That they'll speak later on by Suda Shabbos. This is just very interesting. Now, then after Shabbos, I packed up the chandelier. As it happened, that chandelier never went into the Rebbe's house. And because they were looking for a light, not for the dining room, they were looking for a light. There's a small table off the dining room, which, where there's a telephone there. Those that have been through the Rebbe's house. It's like a bit of a morning room. Anyways, but that chandelier never ended up in the Rebbe's house. But I just wanted to share with you that story, which I remember till today. It's standing in the Rebbe's space, which was something which was, again, it's a Baruch Shem had a schus, be brought up by my father, and it should never be about us. It's, you always have to do what you have to do, and then later just get out of the way. But the Rebbe came in, the Rebbe did not interrupt. The Rebbe stood there, the Rebbe gave the space. We talk about this, the Rebbe is the Rebbe, but you see about the Rebbe, whether it was every aspect of one's life. I'm not going to say midas, I'm thinking about every aspect of one's life, and that's what to us, our Rebbe and a Chassid is all about. It's not just when we're davening, when we're learning. It's about our interaction with others, what we saw from the Rebbe, that how the Rebbe, every Yid was so precious.
Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Junik. I'm sure everyone was inspired. Just want to remind everyone that next week in Mitzvah Shem, Mashiach doesn't come. Rabbi Kaplan will be speaking on the topic, Is the Love Real? And also in Mitzvah Shem tomorrow at 6 p.m., there's an incredible, unprecedented thing during an unprecedented time. 18 minutes, 18 for 18. Please encourage everyone to come. Visit 18for18.com.au. A big yashikayach. Sei gesund.
Thank you. Hatzlacha, Rabbi, and have a good evening, everybody. Good night.
Yashikayach, Rabbi Junik.
My pleasure. Nice to see everybody. As everybody jumping off. Where's Shimon? He left off here. Aaron Yashikayach, Rabbi Aaron. And I see Aaron Safran.
Oh,
I see Aaron Safran. Right, nice to see you. How old are you?
15.
15, Kain Hara. Keep on going. You should have a lot of hatzlacha. I'm just reading some names. Okay, all the best, everybody. We'll see you guys.
Adios.
Sei gesund.
And we'll connect once again, Kultur. Bye.